Old imperialism versus new imperialism. Does anyone remember the 3 G's of colonialism?
Gold, glory, and God.
Gold, glory, and God. Yep. All right. Old imperialism, from 1500 to 1600, is characterized by small settlements, primarily as coastal trading ports and for sea trade. Under the new imperialism, from 1700 to the 1900s, small ports will shift into large colonial possessions of land and resources. We have a map of the world during the age of colonialism. This is a map of European territorial holdings in the 18th century, as you can see. In the late 1700s, the European powers extended their domination over much of the world. The British controlled territory in West Africa, on the Indian subcontinent, and of course in North America. The French had not yet acquired the Louisiana Territory, but notably did have overseas holdings in Haiti and in South America. The Dutch controlled territory in South America and possessed extensive holdings in Indonesia. These will be known as the Dutch East Indies. The Portuguese Empire controls trade in Angola, which is a major hub of the slave trade, territory in East Africa, and the western coast of the Indian subcontinent. And the Spanish control a massive empire composed of all the Louisiana Territory, which they'll give the French in 1803, all of Central America, Cuba and many of the Caribbean islands, the majority of South America, with the exception of Brazil, and the Philippines. And not to be forgotten is the Russian Empire, who under the Tsar extends their empire eastward. Not to be confused with the characteristics of imperialism. This is our God, gold, and glory now. We have the 5 motives for imperialism. The first of which is the economic motive. First and foremost in this new age of imperialism is the drive for economic growth. The Industrial Revolution in Europe created a need for new and more raw materials, as well as this need drove the conquest of new markets in which to sell manufactured goods. Second motive is the exploratory motive. This went hand in hand with the economic drive. This is a desire to explore new lands, acquire new lands, find and acquire new raw materials. And then we have ethnocentrism, which is racism. This is the belief in the white man's burden, or that it was the duty of the white Europeans to civilize people of color in the rest of the world. So the political motivation, more land, more power, is a strong motivating factor in European colonialization. To a large extent, extraterritorial holdings, colonies, empires, are the physical measure of the empire's ability to project its power beyond the borders of its homeland. And as we'll see during the First World War, people of far-flung colonies have been made to serve as soldiers and provide resources for European power struggles. Right, and finally, our last motivation is a religious motive. Missionary work and converting non-Christians was seen as an important aspect of being a Christian. This once again brings us back to the Spanish colonization of the New World with their God, gold, and glory. That's religious, economic, and political for the motivations. These motivations often work in conjunction with each other to provide the totality of a European or the European motivations for colonialism. All right, the first of these spheres of influence we'll be talking about today is the Indian subcontinent. All right, European colonization in India is motivated by a desire for spices, cotton, and tea.
Always the freaking tea.
With the English, yes.
That's a shame because I love tea. The sad part is I'm just too lazy to brew it right now when I get home.
All right, where's England getting most of its cotton in the period before this point? Before the year of about 1861.
Western,
Where's that?
Western places.
West.
Yeah.
All right, most of the English cotton is coming from the American South, and the reason they need a new source of cotton after 1861 is the American Civil War will end slavery. All right, so the British East India Company is founded as a joint stock company in 1600, and is founded to trade in the Indian Ocean region and later with Qing China. The company seized control of parts of the Indian subcontinent and would ultimately establish the colony of Hong Kong in China. The Dutch East India Company was a multinational corporation founded with the Dutch government's consolidation of several competing Dutch companies and founded with the intent to compete with the British East India Company. These two companies would compete against each other and try and outmaneuver each other until the Dutch company failed in 1799. British merchants and the military ruled harshly over the people of India, exploiting their labor and resources for the benefit of the British East India Company. In India, people don't just accept outside intervention, but the British during this time have a rule limerick of saying, whatever happens, we have got the Maxim gun and they have not. Hiram Maxim invents the world's first machine gun, and the British use their technological advantage at this time period to assert their military dominance over the peoples of Africa. Well, sorry, India. In 1857, Indian laborers began a rebellion against the brutality of British domination. Does anyone know the major religions in India? Major religions in India. You have Hinduism and Islam. In Hinduism, they have their cow is their sacred animal. And Islam forbids the consumption of pork products. So with their wonderful religious tolerance, to quell this rebellion, the British soldiers greased their guns with beef and pork fat. And the British soldiers were able to put down the rebellion within months. As a result of the Great Rebellion, domination by the British East India Company was replaced by authoritarian rule over India with the formation of the British Raj in 1858. The British colonial rule of India would persist through the remainder of the 1800s. It would survive the First World War, the Gold Depression of the 30s, famines, and plagues, before gaining independence in 1947 during a period of historical European weakness following the devastation of the Second World War. All right, that's other sheet that I gave you with the 4 questions on it. This is our first of the questions that we're going to work through together. Which of the 5 motives for imperialism play a prominent role in the British colonization of India? So these are our characteristics. Now that one was the motives of imperialism. So who can give me a major one? Yes.
Economics.
Economic is the primary one because they need new source for cotton.
Right.
to fuel British industrialization. Fuel industrialism. I'll go ahead and put down. We'll take some time. Let's take about 2-3 minutes to answer this question. And then we'll revisit that later on. Can we identify any other? We have the economic motive. What other motives do we see here in British colonization? Someone else, please. All right, go ahead. Give us that again.
You would need politics, more land equals more power.
British looking for political power in Europe.
Are you going to write this down, or we should be writing down?
You should be writing on the other piece of paper under question number 1. All right, might there be some ethnocentric motivations here, some racial overtones? Religion, of course. And therefore we had the economic motivation to fuel industrialization, the exploratory motivation to find the resources that will be exploited with the economic incentive, ethnocentrism and religion both had some defining elements, and political power in Europe is the end goal. Take about 1 more minute to get that all written down.
What were the? I got like the first.
This one? Yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's all we have.
No, so we see the economic.
Good day.
These are the 5 motives for imperialism on that slide.
Economic, that's all we have.
No.
Yeah, I was.
No, these 5 motivations all interact with each other. It's all intertwined. So you have the economic motivation to fuel their industrialization. They need raw resources. The exploratory motivation, they need to find those raw resources. They have an ethnocentric worldview with their belief that it's their job to civilize non-European places. There's religious connotations thrown throughout. It's not a primary driving factor here. But the end goal is political power within the European spheres of influence. Moving on to China, with the weakening of the Qing dynasty. By the late 1700s, China had the world's largest population and some of the most sought after raw materials on the planet.
Opium is also one.
Oh, sorry. This is on the very last sheet. There were problems with the printer, and it just sort of tacked on to the end. And then once we finish this page, we'll jump back to where we just left. the main packet.
Question, did opium come from China?
It'll play a very important role in China, but it does not come from China.
Remind me where it comes from because of the opium wars.
Mm-hmm.
I don't remember where it comes from.
It comes from we'll keep there about 5 minutes. You give us a little preview. But all of these areas are referred to by the Europeans as the Orient, Oriental. In fact, that's a term that will change depending where you are in Europe. The Orient, instead of being one specific geographic location, will be wherever we've got colonies. So it's where the foreigners come from, is the Orient. All right, so the weakening of China. World's largest population, raw materials. All right, China's government attempts to take part in the Industrial Revolution, but fails, resulting in the dynasty being deeply indebted and with an industrial base nowhere in sight. So with a large population, so we have that population surplus, we have raw materials. Why did China fail to industrialize? Why did China fail to industrialize? Oh, they had the raw materials and the surplus population, the two things we learned that enabled the European powers to industrialize. No, what's that? Not a good government? Okay.
Do they have new resources to expand on?
They had the resources. So China is so good at manufacturing things using the pre-industrial system that it doesn't make sense for them to upend their society and sink all of this capital into industrialization. It probably made sense to them after this period of Right. Europeans and Japanese established trading ports that grow into spheres of influence. Spheres of influence are areas in which the political and economic interests of one nation dominate those of other nations. Here we have a map of the spheres of influence in China with the treaty ports in the year 1900. As you can see, the British, French, German, Japanese, and Russian empires all had their spheres of influence within China. Russia's up there in Mongolia. The Germans just have that little section on the Yellow Sea. And in fact, it'll be the size of that German section and the size of some of these German sections when we look at Africa. It'll be a major source of discontent among Germans in the period leading up to the First World War. We'll talk about it later, but the reason that's so small is not because Germany is weak, it's because Germany is young.
Germany is weak.
At this point in time, they are Europe's most populous country, as well as its most industrialized. They're just also the youngest country. Not being founded until, I think it's like 1838, something around there. All right, the Opium Wars. So what do we do with opium?
Yay! No, not yay. Opium bad, it's a drug.
So the European powers who control the largest spheres of influence in southern and western China are the British and the French. Under their colonial domination, almost all commerce and agriculture is controlled by European merchants rather than by Chinese natives. The Europeans have one small problem, that's that they do not produce anything the Chinese want. The Chinese will accept their silver, but they don't want European manufactured goods. As we said, they make very high quality and they produce very efficiently. They get by on their own just fine, essentially. So the British introduce a situation which they can exploit to get China trading with them. They introduce opium to the Chinese markets.
And then the Chinese started making opium pipes. remember correctly.
Opium is grown on the Indian subcontinent and was imported illegally under Qin law by British and French smugglers, resulting in the addiction of a large portion of the Chinese population. This makes the Chinese very, very angry. And in an event very similar to the Boston Tea Party, they seize a bunch of British ships, throw all the opium into the water or into the oceans. The British say, hey, you owe us for all that opium. And China says, no, we don't. We just don't. And the British say, hey, we've got cannons and ships. You owe us for the opium. War between the European merchants and the weak Chinese military broke out in the mid-1800s, resulting in European victory and continued trading rights in China.
Yeah, technically it is China's fault because they did destroy just essentially property, that was legal to distribute it. I mean,
We destroy drug contraband all the time.
well, yeah, but they literally just trashed like property essentially they were trying to trade though. Secretly. So you break it, you buy it.
Okay. And is tea a drug?
Anything can be a drug if you get addicted to it. You know, coffee.
Tea is a drug, coffee, sugar, major export this time.
Caffeine.
All right, there's a graph of opium imports in China between 1650 and 1880. Opium imports increased dramatically throughout this period, increasing from 200 tons in 1800 to a whopping 6,500 tons in 1880. Are we still on that out of order page?
Southeast Asia. And this
All right, Southeast Asia and South Pacific.
What's the difference?
Well, when we get to the map.
Oh.
All right. So this is China's traditional sphere of influence. We saw China's in a bit of a pickle right now.
What are they not?
The entire part of world history up until this point.
They,
We're pretty much number one.
including that, like, they just, China's just, real on weird stuff.
Well, in China, they currently state that this is when China enters a historic period of world weakness that they are just now exiting. All right, so European expansion timeline. China's traditionally in charge down here. All right. From India, the British Empire extended their control into Burma, Singapore, and Malay. French missionaries established colonies in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. In 1816, the Netherlands, the Dutch, combined competing trading posts to form the Dutch East Indies. In 1887, the French consolidated their colonies to form French Indochina, which is modern-day Vietnam. In 1898, following the Spanish-American War, the United States acquires the Philippines from Spain. This results in the Philippine Insurrection, or the Tagalog Insurgency, which is a brutal guerrilla war that lasted from February 1899 to July 1902, and then a second rebellion by the Moro, which are a ethnic group within the Philippines that is predominantly Muslim, and that rebellion lasts until 1913. So the actual war in this theater, the actual war between the Philippines and Spain is a war in very, very, very heavy quotations. And on the ground, it looked a lot more like Spanish generals just surrendering to, well, handing territory over to American generals. And the majority of the casualties during this part of the conflict are simply from miscommunications.
Yeah, give us that territory, we own it now.
Well, the Spanish don't want to be seen just rolling over, but also don't want their empire, their entire empire, country, and society to go down in flames.
Well, why would you do one thing, you know?
Exactly. All right, map of colonies in Southeast Asia as they were in 1895. You can see we have territory here by the British, the Dutch, the French, German, Portuguese, and Spanish empires. And can anyone tell me the one state here that maintained its independence? Siam. Yes, Siam retained its independence with the city of Bangkok, and it's wedged between British Burma and French Indochina. All right, the very, very, very bottom of that page, and then going back into the main part of the packet, we're moving on to Africa. Here's a map of Africa before and after the Berlin Conference. As you can see, there's a stark difference between the two. Right. Colonization in Africa is nothing new. I was talking about we're shifting from colonization to imperialism. So characteristics of early African colonization. Early African colonization was fueled primarily by the transatlantic slave trade. The demand for slave labor was fueled by colonization and agricultural developments in the Americas, where Native Americans died of old world diseases to which African slaves were immune. Everyone finding what we're supposed to do? Our slave ports were established along the west coast of Africa, which became known as the Slave Coast. European explorers searching for a sea route to China and India and Southeast Asia established ports along the African coast that serve as refueling stations and small trading posts. And some Europeans, especially European missionaries, permanently settled in Africa, although these settlements tended not to become larger than small communities. I'll move it back for just a second so we look at that map again. You can see the slave coast in the west, small settlements around the exterior of the continent to serve as refueling stations for the trip over to China and India. All right, new African imperialism. By 1880, slavery was abolished in most European countries, as well as in the United States. Due to the abolition of slavery, imperialism shifted its focus from the export of slaves to the export of raw materials such as gold, ivory, rubber, diamonds, and food. We're back into the main body of the packet. that this new dynamic of African imperialism led to Europeans becoming more competitive for the possession of lands, which they used to establish plantations, mines, and agricultural systems. As we said, this is when the small European coastal colonies become large swaths of the interior land. I just recently found out the other day, we have a company that's based in St. Louis, Mollencroft. Mollencroft mines the uranium that goes to make the atomic bombs that we dropped in World War II from the Congo, and that's the same uranium that is dumped in the Bridgeton landfill and is on fire today.
You know what they should do with all that uranium? They should make it to dust and put it on their nails like they do usually for fashion.
Like the uranium girls?
Yeah.
We'll talk about the uranium girls during the First World War.
Awesome.
Everything that used to glow in the dark just used to be radioactive, so you had to watch.
No, I don't know what you mean. That was just a fashion statement.
You should watch Uranium Girls, Eric. It's very good. The show.
I should.
It's good. Have you watched it?
No.
It's really good. It's like a documentary movie.
Little docudrama.
Yeah, but it seems to be pretty historical and accurate and everything.
I just find it funny that we're still essentially killing ourselves in the name of beauty, just by like smearing radiation on ourselves.
I mean, you know about the lead paint that they used to use for makeup, right?
No.
Oh, yeah. The white Victorian wig, or the white 1700s wigs, the makeup, the little rouge cheeks, all lead-based.
Seriously?
Mhm.
Oh.
I believe it's just powdered white lead. Like, there's no lead base, I think it's just lead.
Oh. I'm sure they probably have some brain dysfunction afterwards.
Oh, yeah. All right, take about 2 minutes for this question, and then we'll discuss which of the 5 motives for imperialism play prominent roles in the European colonization of Africa. Once again, those motives for imperialism are economic, exploratory, ethnocentric, political, and religious.
Or just meant to like choose like.
Of those, which of the 5, not what one of the 5. So there's more than one, and they're all interrelated to each other. Ethnocentric.
Oh, yeah.
Or it should be just on the first page of your notes. The list should start. What's it? Exploration? Yes. We need to explore and find the resources, which we will exploit economically. The new resources that we are exploiting economically will give us more political power in Europe. And then we'll just go ahead and look at this all through an ethnocentric and religious worldview, where everything we do is good.
Saying that when Columbus went to America and then just started chucking up Indians and
Well, this is the time period where you just sum it up by the phrase, and then everything got worse. Everything's just going to get worse.
No, you know, it was for God, you know, so we get the, you know, free pass card. You know what else we should do? We should go like make a bunch of people as slaves and just say, we did it for God.
Let's take about 1 more minute to get your thoughts down on that question.
Eric,
Yeah.
and then World War I happens.
Yes. Yep. And then World War II happens.
Then World War III.
Oh, wait.
Not yet.
We'll get to how all that's still World War I, Part 2, and then Part 3.
borders are kind of approaching.
That its own should be its own history.
Speaking of world wars, does anyone remember the French Indian War from American history?
I would vaguely, yes.
The Indian in that title is not referring to Native Americans. It's referring to the Indian subcontinent. That's when the British and French are battling each other for control over the Indian subcontinent. And it's often said to be the world's first world war. But the major difference is communication so slow back then that the vibe's different than an actual world war. Moving on to the Berlin Conference of 1884 and 1885. So throughout the 1880s, European colonies in Africa grow closer together until their borders begin to touch. Worried about the prospect of colonial tensions sparking a general European war, a horrible one, they decide to settle their borders diplomatically. Between 1884 and 1885, European imperialist diplomats meet in Berlin to partition Africa until the entire continent was under European possession. So we're down here to the fifth characteristic of imperialism: territorial division of the world. Not a single black African is present at this meeting. The borders they come up with do not regard existing political or cultural borders. Different ethnic groups are shoved together to make one country. And this is the origin of the vast majority of the problems, the civil wars, the conflict, the strife that we still see in Africa today. Of course, after the conference, well, and before the conference, throughout this whole period, the peoples of Africa don't just take this line down. Why did it take until, so Africa is not discovered in the way that the New World is. Why does it take until the 1800s for the European colony or powers to colonize Africa? Do they want to colonize it in earlier periods? No. Still had resources. The new gold was there, silver. What they lacked was the ability. So guns are around in the 1700s, with the majority of fighting, especially whenever you're fighting dismounted, which Africa has a disease that just kills horses. That's why there's not really horses in Africa.
You got zebras though.
You have zebras, a different species. Yep.
But you don't want to go near those things. Though.
You cannot ride a zebra. It does not work well. They're mean. They're very mean.
Zebras will try to drown you, like they do with their, well, bridal children zebras or females. They will try to drown them.
Okay, never heard of drowning zebras before.
They do it. They do it.
All right, in Africa, there are dozens of resistance attempts, but only 2 countries are successfully able to maintain their independence. Those are Ethiopia and Liberia. So why Ethiopia? Why is Ethiopia able to resist European colonialism? Anyone know the dominant religion in Ethiopia?
I do not.
No. This is a pretty niche one that I only know because anyone ever had Ethiopian food? Door a lot. It's fantastic. One of the first things I learned to cook for myself. You get instead of a plate, you eat off basically a giant sourdough pancake, and you have beef or chicken stews that all get piled in the middle. Tear off some corners, use it as a little utensil, pick it up with your hand, pop it in your mouth. It's a good time. Good date night activity.
I should learn how to make that.
It's a whole chicken, whole pound of onions, and then beurre, I think is the name of the seasoning.
Right.
It's I think paprika, a whole bunch of other red spices, and some cinnamon. Alright, but the dominant religion of Ethiopia is Christian. It's the world's oldest Christian nation, and as such, received a certain level of support from European Christians. Now, Liberia, on the other hand, began in the early 19th century as a project of the American Colonization Society, who believed that black people would face better chances of freedom and prosperity if they were to go back to Africa.
Realize they didn't realize that's under chiefs. I just didn't realize why.
Anyone know which U.S. president is a very big proponent of that idea? Abraham Lincoln. He wanted to free the slaves and then send them away. As a result of the partition of Africa, Africans are given a new nationality which had nothing to do with their previous existing tribes or identities. Examples of this are modern African nations, Kenya, South Africa, Angola. Areas that are newly under colonial rule are given new European languages, religions, and cultures, as well as political and legal systems and new systems of education and labor. This shows Africa after the division at the Berlin Conference. You can see some of these new areas have come into existence. South Africa, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia is independent, Liberia is independent, you have Sierra Leone, Gambia, Guinea, Gold Coast, Togoland, Spanish Guinea, Nigeria, all those former slave coast countries. The Germans have Southwest Africa, German East Africa, and Cameroon and Togoland. France has a large section of Northern Africa above the Sahara, including Morocco, Tunisia, Algeria, French West Africa, as well as Sub-Saharan African holdings, which French Equatorial Africa, and the island of Madagascar. Italy's up in Libya, over in Eritrea, and are in part of Somalia, which they have split with the British. The Spanish just have little holdings up in Spanish Morocco, the Straits of Gibraltar, and Rio de Oro. Portugal with Angola, Mozambique. All right, and Belgium with the Belgian Congo. Of these colonial powers, the Belgians are sometimes considered to be particularly egregious. So Belgium, or the Belgian Congo, is not the property of Belgium. It became property of Belgium's king, King Leopold II. He inherited from his father. He turns Belgium into, or he turns the Congo, not Belgium, he essentially turns the Congo into one giant rubber factory. The automotive is invented. Goodyear Tires is currently, at this point, opening plantations in South America where they have planted rubber trees. The problem is those rubber trees are going to take about 25 years to mature before they can start producing rubber. Rubber is produced, you scrape the bark of the tree, sap oozes out, that sap is heated and refined to give us rubber, and then later we invent vulcanized rubber. Be very, obviously, rubber is important to boots. When we get to that First World War, boots. All right, in Belgium, King Leopold realizes, here we have rubber. It doesn't grow on trees, it grows on vines. And these vines are just everywhere. This is in addition to the Congo just being rich in natural resources. When natural resources like diamonds and copper, lithium, do appear in the Congo, They're often some of the most pure deposits in the world. Louisville decides that he's got 25 years to eke as much money out of this. He's going to make himself a worldwide monopoly on rubber.
Gosh, it's like the common player in one of my games that goes around purposely stealing resources in front of you before I get to them first. And then they resell that at half the price, at full half the price. Then I have to start saying, you're scamming me, bro. That's too much for platinum.
Things in the Congo don't go quite as smoothly as Louisville hopes. And in the end, they're only able to extract about $1 billion in today's money from the Congo. And this comes at the cost of the lives of 10 million Congolese. A rather infamous aspect of Belgian colonization of the Congo is how do you maintain, well, like I said, white people just die like crazy, especially in the Congo, especially along the rivers of the Congo because of malarial mosquitoes.
I would say.
So you have maybe one white officer for every 1,000 Congolese troops. So how do you keep them from just killing you?
I don't know.
The Belgians controlled the ammo supply. They would underfeed the Belgian soldiers to keep them low energy. Whenever these Belgian soldiers would take their bullets to go and hunt, they needed to, well, they weren't allowed to take their bullets to hunt. They wanted them underfed. So anytime that the Belgian, or that the Congolese fired their rifles, they needed to bring back one severed right hand to prove the person they had killed. This system becomes so pervasive that throughout the Congo, there are trading posts that sole reason to exist is to smoke and preserve hands to send back for more bullets.
Seriously?
The people in Belgium have almost no idea that this is happening. Like I said, Belgium doesn't own the Congo. The king of Belgium owns the Congo.
So essentially, okay, I'm confused. They shoot people, they grab their arm, they send it.
They shoot wild game, and then they take people, grab their arm, and use that for more bullets. You had to exchange one hand for one bullet.
That's a scam.
You weren't allowed to miss. You weren't allowed to drop your bullets. You especially weren't allowed to stash bullets away to use to kill your white officers.
But this is a scam. And you know, the bullets are no worth than like a few pounds or whatever they're.
It's not about the cost. It's about keeping tally, keeping track of who has the bullets and what they're using them for. The Belgians are in the Congo from 1908 until 1960.
Why wouldn't they just make a thing where they just use the game page? Like
They weren't allowed to be hunted.
Of what they, so they're trying to do it like.
Yeah, they're doing it on the side. And a lot of them are hunting and selling the stuff. I didn't mention it too much, but animal pelts, I mean, the leopard and cheetah skins, all the African game contraband that we picture today, the ivory, so the stacks of elephant tucks, all that. That's all what they're using the bullets for. All right. How did the expanding use of scarce resources contribute to conflict and cooperation in Africa during the age of imperialism? So in this case, that conflict would be between Europeans and Africans, and that cooperation will be between Europeans. Take about 2 minutes on that one, then I'll ask for inputs. Alright, so what conflict or fear of conflict was a driving factor or driving motivation for that cooperation? What were Europeans afraid of? Dying, as we all are.
You stupid.
Specifically dying where? Dying in Africa? No, they're worried about their families being killed in Europe by a general European war.
Yeah.
They're worried that conflict over Africa will spark wars between European powers. And the writing's already on the wall by this point. They know that that war or those conflicts would be absolutely devastating. So fear of conflict here leads to cooperation. Alright.
Why are you so good?
Last section, we're moving a little closer to home, in Latin America. Alright, so Latin American under Spanish rule. After the arrival of Christopher Columbus to the New World in 1492, Spanish conquistadors claimed nearly all of Latin America for the Spanish crown. Spanish colonies worked under the encomienda system, where merchants and farmers, as well as conquistadors, received an encomienda from the crown. An encomienda is a grant of both lands and the people living on the lands, well, the labor. It's not direct slavery, it's more forced labor. Encomiendos couldn't be bought and sold, just the land. So in a way, it's a hybrid between what we think of as classic slavery and European-style feudalism, as far as the serfs would be the encomiendas, encomienderos. Anyways, the encomienda system's both a economic and social. It creates a highly racialized social hierarchy. At the bottom of society is enslaved persons who are brought from Africa in the Caribbean. Just slightly above them is Native American Indians. You have the real society. You have the mestizos, who are Spanish and Native, or people who are born of Spanish and Native American parents. Creoles, which are Spaniards born in the New World. And finally, at the top of the society, Peninsulars, who are Spaniards born in Spain. Early independence movements in Latin America. The late 1700s found the Spanish Empire weak. Competition, war debt, and increasing U.S. involvement weakened the Spanish hold over Latin America. By the 1830s, nearly all Latin America had gained independence from Spain, often with the aid of the United States. In 1823, the United States adopted the Monroe Doctrine, which held that European intervention in the political affairs of the Americas including Spanish attempts to regain its colonies, was a potentially hostile act against the United States. This doctrine will be central to U.S. foreign policy for much of the 19th and early 20th centuries. Although now independent, most of the new Latin American countries are in chaos. They face problems such as conflict with forming new governments, a lack of industrialization, that highly racialized social structure, and economies that rely heavily on trade with Europe and the United States. Oh, heavily trading. Sorry, there's a point hanging at the bottom. All right, and a map of Latin America in 1800 and 1830. All right, two towering figures in Latin American history, Simón Bolívar and José de San Martín. San Martín leads the Liberation Army north through Chile, and Bolívar leads the Liberation Army south from the Caribbean coast. By the time the two armies meet in 1824, the majority of South America has been liberated. All right, and influence the United States in Latin America. In 1904, President Roosevelt's Colorari declared that the United States would police the unstable Latin American debtor nations. Due to that economy that's highly reliant on European and American imports, many Latin American countries are unable to pay back their debts to the European powers. And there's fear in America that the Latin American countries' lack of ability to pay back the Europeans will force Europeans' hands, leading to military intervention, and therefore possibly be considered a hostile act against the United States. The United States, who wanted access to Latin America's valuable resources and lands, such as the land that will be used to build the Panama Canal. Throughout the 20th century, the United States will intervene in almost every Latin American country. All right, this is our final map. This is the world in 1900. You can see the monopolies in the form of the Dutch and East India Company. You see that? Finance capital, they're exporting capital instead of trade goods now. Or exporting capital, finance capital is a banking system. All right, international monopolist associations. And now finally, the territorial division of the world. All right, and one last question. Why did nations choose to colonize others, and how did this choice impact the world? They want land. What are some impacts? We had a whole slide on the motivations for colonization. War, division, loss of ethnic and cultural identity, sometimes loss of religious freedom, the erasing of entire cultures. In the case of India and China, the destruction of empires that predate Europe. And once you're done with those sheets, you just turn them in to Mr. Thomas. What's that? No, keep your notes
Yep, right
as
there.
usual. Just the one that says formative.
Make sure your name's on it.
Name on it, please, even though I did not know that.